This is a box of Barry Malzberg's books. Not just written by Barry Malzberg. These books belonged to Barry Malzberg. They were sent to me by Erica Malzberg, who's his youngest daughter, who reached out to me after my video that I published. That was a eulogy video after Barry passed away. And Erica and I exchanged a few emails back and forth where she expressed gratitude for the video and said that she and her mother, and I think her sister, had watched the video. I think Erica and her mother watched it together, and they said that it meant something to them. And then said that as a gesture of gratitude, she would like to send me some of his books. She asked me if there was anything specifically that I was looking for, and I sort of timorously said, feeling internally like this is maybe too much to ask for, if you happen to have an extra copy of Beyond Apollo sitting around that you have in duplicate that you won't miss, I think that is the book that I would like the most. Not just because it's Beyond Apollo, which is his most famous book, but it's also the first book that I read from Malzberg. This is the copy that I got in Mexico City. She responded, said no problem. So all that I know for sure is in here is a hardcover of Beyond Apollo and a paperback. This is a box full of books. First is what looks like a zine, Barry N. Malzberg, Dweller in the Deeps, a working bibliography by Phil Stevenson Payne from Galactic Central. I do not need to look this up to know that this is a rarity. Here is a memorial coin, and I think that this is a callback to something that Malzberg apparently used to do. Malzberg would leave coins like this around conventions, SF conventions, and I guess it got on people's nerves or it started a commotion. Nobody knew who was doing it, and it was Malzberg. It says, "Our youth and possibility may be stripped from us, but our failure can remain shining and constant forever." On a Planet Alien, the UK edition of the same book. A copy of Fantasy and Science Fiction with a Malzberg story on the cover. When is this from? June 2003. That is the most recent Malzberg material that I own, so far at least. Tripping with the Alchemist. Out from Ganymede. This is a trade paperback of On a Planet Alien with the Giger-esque cover. What's in here? So it includes Scop, which is one of his JFK novels, In the Enclosure, and On a Planet Alien. Here's a collection that he co-edited. Arena Sports by Ed Furman and Malzberg. I've never seen this before. I presume this is a rare book. Does have a Malzberg story in it, Closed Sicilian, also a Bel Pronzini, and an afterword titled On the Non-Transcendence of Sport by Barry Malzberg. If anybody can get me to be interested in sports fiction, it's Barry Malzberg. Oh, wow. Neglected Visions, another collection that Malzberg co-edited with Martin Harry Greenberg and Joseph D. Olander. Has a blurb on the cover from Malzberg. It says, "This anthology is an attempt to restore the reputations of 8 writers who did not achieve the recognition they deserved. Mark Clifton, Christopher Anvil, Chris Neville, Randall Garrett, Peter Phillips, Robert Abernathy, Norman Kagan, Wyman Gwynn, and Floyd L. Wallace." This is fascinating. This is absolutely going to be read. Hardcover of Down Here in the Dream Quarter. Those were not book club editions, nor is this one. I'm trying to recall if this is stories or essays. "I have ceased like a drunk, pounding helplessly at the luncheonette window in the cold to write science fiction. I have, Barry Ann Malzberg continues, been so damned busy that for a long time it never occurred to me to ask myself what I was doing here. I never intended to make a career as an SF writer, but I think that it is possible to say that if my career as a science fiction writer is over today, it is a career whose epitaph must read, "Killed by ambition, he wanted to change the field and make it anew." With this stunning announcement, an unusual and highly gifted writer bids an uninhibited farewell to an extraordinary career that has generated controversy in and outside the genre, together with 22 stories and 2 essays, all of which now appear as his 6th and possibly final collection, is his afterword to each of them, as well as his provocative remarks on the state of science fiction today, what goes on behind the scenes, his friends and enemies, why he is leaving it all. There is a quote from Joyce Carol Oates calling Guernica Night a mysterious and provocative work. The Passage of the Light, the recursive science fiction of Barry Ann Malzberg, edited by Mike Resnick and Anthony R. Lewis. Another rarity. I have never heard of this. This collection contains over 170,000 words of some of the funniest and most biting science fiction ever written, science fiction stories that question the very values and dreams of the field. Not sure I can show this one on YouTube. It's a Stark House of Dwellers of the Deep and Gather in the Hall of the Planets with an angel. And there's Barry. Their Immortal Hearts, 3 Visions of Time, Bishop, Malzberg, and McAllister. Another rare book, I would assume. I've never even seen an image of a few of these, including that one. Final War and Other Fantasies, and In the Pocket and Other SF Stories, another Stark House print. The Very Best of Barry Ann Malzberg from Nonstop Press. Screen. This is in French. Problems Solved by Malzberg and Pronzini. This is the first SF rediscovery book that I've ever owned, as far as I can recall. It is Revelations. I'm back, obviously wearing new clothing. This has occurred because I made good and sure that all of the books were not in focus the first take. And I meant for that to be the only take because I wanted to get my genuine reaction to the books. Pretty important thing to do for this once-in-a-lifetime video. But alas, for about 10 books, I didn't do that, and then I forgot the 2 most important books to even show them on camera. So here we are. Underlay is Malzberg's favorite book. This is the book that he was most proud of writing. This is not easy to find. It is available in an omnibus along with Overlay, which is a book that I really adore, as well as another book of his that I don't recall. When I pulled this out of the box, I said, oh my God. Oh my God. I have not read this one yet. This is guaranteed going to be read. He wrote at least a couple of books with Bill Pronzini. This is one of them, Night Screams. Here's another, Acts of Mercy. This is a really special book. This might actually be the current reigning #1 Malzberg book. For me, Destruction of the Temple. This is one of the most intense books I've ever read. It's his reimagining of the JFK assassination in the future, where these actors play out the assassination over and over again and then flash back in time to experience incidents of racial violence throughout American history. Truly potent. I cherish this book, obviously, because this copy belonged to Malzberg, but also this is just one of the best science fiction novels that I've ever read. This was his final novel, the remaking of Sigmund Freud. This was published in 1986. He went on to write some short fiction. I know that he did collaborations with Kathy Koja that were after this, but I think that this was his last full-length novel. And 2 different editions of the Sodom and Gomorrah business. This is the UK, And this is the American. The Day of the Burning. This is also a special one. This is going to be one of the first that I read. I intend to read all of these titles at some point, whether in these actual physical copies, which is something that makes me slightly nervous. The thought of spilling coffee on any of these accidentally just makes my skin crawl. So I may end up reading other copies or reading these ebook versions, but this is one of his most critically acclaimed books. And this is, I think, an NEL, yep, UK paperback, obviously, edition. Gorgeous cover. Tim White cover. It's really one of the most striking covers of a science fiction book. And then these are the two copies of Beyond Apollo that I requested. I requested a copy, but she was generous enough to send me two. This is the same as the one that I read for the first time, although this is in much better condition. Always loved this cover as well. And then this is the hardcover. This is not a book club. This book and its reputation and the controversy around it is the closest that Malzberg has come to being canonized as one of the great science fiction writers, or even as a science fiction writer who's really worthy of that sort of like critical acclaim or critical attention and praise and a wider readership. This also would be, I think, if you have not read Malzberg before, probably a good taster, not just because it's the most famous book, also because it's a stroke of genius. I adore this novel. But it introduces a lot of the thematics and stylistic idiosyncrasies with Malzberg that are pretty divisive, and this was a very divisive book. Malzberg was a controversial figure, continues to be one, and I understand and accept that he's an acquired taste. I think a lot of science fiction readers don't want to read science fiction written by someone who might despise them. And a lot of his writing is unpleasant to read. A lot of it is extremely sexually graphic. He wrote erotica on the side to help pay the bills, and a lot of that transfers over into a science fiction writing. I understand that that's not for everybody. It's not even always for me. He also wrote with a really deep, profound sense of despair, a sort of hopelessness, a sort of acrid bitterness tinged with rage that is usually wrapped up with irony and satire and this really mordant sense of humor. And on top of being sort of acrimonious, the prose can also be rather convoluted. So this is not, I think, a recipe for broad appeal, but I think out of all of the offerings from American New Wave science fiction, or really at this point I think I would lump in UK New Wave from his contemporary period, even people like Ballard, I think that there is something about Malzberg that is other. And for the right reader, I don't think that there is another writer that really, you have to take bits from different writers to combine them to get something like Malzberg. You have to take Ballard and PKD, maybe a little bit of Philip Roth and Joanna Russ, two people who probably wouldn't want to be talked about in the same sentence, but combine all those people, it kind of gives you a taste of what Malzberg is like. I said something in my email exchanges with Erica that was an amendment to something that I said in that eulogy video, where I said that I was sort of skeptical that Malzberg would really have a better reception now than he did during his period of most prolific output and broadest exposure while he was still writing. Part of me suspects that that's probably true, but also at risk of sounding maybe a little bit pat or corny, I really genuinely feel like the world just feels more and more Malzbergian as time goes on. I think that the real gravity in Malzberg's writing is a confrontation with a certain hostility that is in the world, a certain pessimism, a certain disappointment with things as they have turned out. And I think that maybe, unfortunately, there is much more fertile ground these days for that message to land or for people to resonate with that emotional tenor in the writing. I think that is the thing that will catch people. I think that is the thing that stands a chance of finding broader resonance. It still feels a little bit surreal to own these, to have these in my collection. They're going to stay there probably until I die. I'm going to have these forever. Erica, thank you again, and you've paid me a genuinely great honor, and I hope that I've done a good enough job at conveying why I think his books are special.